Okay, I know it's extended rec day and I know you're tired, but you need to wake up, okay? So do whatever you need to do real quick. I'll give you 5 seconds to wake up. You need to punch your neighbor. Don't punch him hard, but whatever you need to do, you got 5 seconds. Motion right there. Yeah, don't use the balcony as an excuse to go to sleep. You gotta wake up. You gotta wake up. Yep, stretch, whatever you need to do. You got 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right. You should be good. You should have a good 30 minutes in you, right? 30 minutes in you to try to focus. Here we go. All right. Here's kind of my first question I want you to start thinking about. Have you ever had a plan not go how you thought? Okay, very good. Very good. My friend Janice, this is where I most often hear plans not going how they thought. It's usually with weddings, and that was the case for my friend Janice. I was going to my senior year of college, and me and my brother were both going to be in Janice's wedding, a good friend of mine, and it was over spring break. And we traveled down to Lawton, Oklahoma, and it was supposed to be beautiful weather. And she was going to have the wedding outside in her backyard, her family's backyard. And, you know, she had planned this for a long time. Usually when you plan weddings, you do that for a long time. And so all the chairs were ordered, the dress was ready, the cake was ready, everything was ready to go. All that now was kind of left up to odds was going to be the weather. And the weather was supposed to be beautiful, and the rehearsal night came, and we went outside, and it was probably one of the nicest nights in Oklahoma I've ever experienced. There were no mosquitoes, there were no bugs, there was like a cool breeze, the grass was green, it was beautiful. And the rehearsal went off without a hitch. And we were getting really excited about, like, the next day, Janice is going to be married, and her life's going to change, and we were giddy and happy, and we all loaded into the car, and we go to this venue to have the rehearsal dinner. And we give these toasts to this wonderful life that Janice and Christian are going to have together following the Lord, and it's going to be glorious and wonderful. And the toasts were great. Everybody's crying. It was a wonderful night. And then we go outside, and the weather had changed. And the wind, the Oklahoma wind, was blowing, and the rain was coming down, and it felt at least like 20 to 30 degrees cooler than it had just a few hours ago. And we're like, this is crazy, this is weird. But, you know, Oklahoma, the weather is crazy, and it'll pass, whatever. We go home, we go to sleep. We say, Lord, please, just, you know, take care of the weather tomorrow. And we kind of stay up late and make pallets on the living room floor and watch a movie and fall asleep. The next day we wake up, and it's wedding day, right? It's the day. It's coronation day. That's what it makes me think of, right? That's what it felt like. It's wedding day. And we get up, and we're so excited, and we're going to go to Janice's room. We're going to start all getting ready. And we kind of start to get this feel that something's not right. And so we go, and we look out the window, and a blizzard has come through Oklahoma. Yeah, in March. This is crazy. And it's like late March. And this blizzard has come through, and there was like 2 to 3 inches of snow on the ground. Snow was still coming down. All of the beautiful white chairs and the things that they had hung on the sides of the chairs, you know, to make it look pretty, like bows or flowers or whatever, everything is covered in snow. And Janice looks at me and she said, I planned to have the wedding outside. We are having the wedding outside. And I said, okay, whatever. So I go and let the ushers know the wedding is still a go outside. Janice said she has a plan, and this is what's going to happen, come rain or come shine or blizzard. You know, this is crazy, but this is what's going to happen. And so the ushers go out, my brother being one of them, and a lot of her family, and they go out, all the guys, and they are covered in like coats and hoodies, and they are getting the snow off of the chairs, and it's just turning into like this sloshy mess, and it's just getting colder and more frigid. And finally, Janice's dad walks into the room, and Janice kind of knows what's coming. And Janice's dad sits down, and he says, Janice, come here. And he pats his knee. And Janice, the bride, she goes and she sits on her dad's lap, and she looks at his face, and tears start streaming. And he said, Janice, we are not having the wedding outside. She said, Dad, I really want to. And he said, I know it's what you planned, but we are not having the wedding outside. Okay. And so quickly we had to readjust everything, take all the chairs to the barn where we were going to have the reception and move everything around and try to redecorate. And it was glorious and wonderful and a bit chaotic. All the guests had to stand for the whole wedding. But it worked. It worked. But it was not how Janice planned it. It's not how she planned it. Have you ever had a plan not go how you thought it would? It doesn't have to be bad. Maybe it's good. Maybe someone threw you a surprise party and they actually caught you off guard. And maybe it even happened on a day that wasn't your real birthday. So you woke up thinking it was another day, you were hanging out with people, and then all of a sudden, bam, surprise. Right? A welcomed surprise, not an unwelcome surprise. It was exciting and happy and fun and glorious. Or maybe you were playing your rival football team. And you would never say this out loud because you have a lot of friends on the football team, but you were definitely the underdog. And you go into this game going, all right, here we go. We're going to be pumped up anyways. And you're being pumped up. And then for some miraculous reason, you pull off the upset, right? And that did not go how you envisioned it going, but it was a good outcome. And the next day you wake up and you're still smiling because of that surprise from the day before. Or maybe your parents have always told you growing up that you're not going to get a phone until you're 16. I know everybody else gets phones when they go to middle school because they're going to be moving around, but you're going to wait until you have a car and then you're going to be driving and you don't need one until you're driving anyways and da-da-da-da. And then your 13th birthday comes and you open a package and all of a sudden it's a phone 3 years early. That is not what you planned, but that's a good surprise. That's a good surprise. Regardless of whether it was better than we planned or worse than we planned, I would bet there's been a time when things did not go as planned. God invites you to join into his story, not the other way around. That is a very important distinction to make. This means that you are not the boss. You are not the one that is in control of how everything plays out. When you give your life to Jesus, you are saying that you submit your life to following Jesus. It is a recognition of the fact that you are not your boss. You are committed to him. And yes, he graciously gives us all these different freedoms and ways that we can follow him in different occupations and ways that he's called us, but he is the one that's definitely in charge. Proverbs 16:9 says it this way: the heart of a man plans his ways, but the Lord establishes his steps. My life has not gone how I planned when I was your age. Not at all. Well, no, not at all. Not at all. I was 9 years old when I gave my life to Jesus. And then when I was 14, I went on this trip with my church to Dallas, and we worked in this inner city area, and I got to work with all these kids that were from hard places. And I felt a huge pull on my heart to work forever with kids from hard places. And I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I kind of had an idea. I went home, and as I was going through high school, this is kind of how I thought it would work out. I thought, okay, Lord, I know for sure I'm kind of ahead of the curve. A lot of my friends don't know what they're doing with their life. I know for sure mine's going to involve adoption. I'm probably going to go to college, and I'm going to get married. And then after we get married, my husband's going to do ministry, and we're going to be called to some big city somewhere, and we're going to be able to live in like a rough part of the city, and I'm going to get to adopt a bunch of kids. That's what's going to happen. It's going to be glorious and wonderful. And here's the deal. I knew in part that God really had given me a heart for kids from hard places. I knew that I had been incredibly blessed to have an entire family who loves Jesus deeply. And I knew that God was calling me specifically to pour that love out onto other people through the means of adoption. I knew that. I felt that at a young age. In fact, I started babysitting in junior high and high school, and a lot of the kids I would babysit were kids that were adopted. And my grandparents, all growing up, my grandparents were foster parents of special needs children. And so having new faces around was always like something that was familiar to me. God was definitely doing something in my life in that direction, But the story did not play out like I thought it would. God orchestrated something different. It kind of happened, the call was similar, but the plan looked a lot different than I had envisioned, if that makes sense. It did not go how I planned. I went to college. I did not fall madly in love and get married. And I remember coming upon graduation and thinking, what am I supposed to do? This isn't part of the plan. I was kind of starting to freak out. The days are coming and I need to figure out where I'm going. And through a series of events, I left college a single woman, and I ended up in Owasso, Oklahoma, which is so far from big city life. It's crazy. It's like a suburb of a suburb. I mean, it's so not the area I thought I would live. And so I'm sitting here doing children's ministry in Owasso, Oklahoma by myself, and I'm like, Lord, this is not what I had envisioned. But I knew He'd put this stirring in my heart, and so I sought out different places in the Tulsa area, which was relatively close to Owasso, of places I could serve, and I found there was this emergency shelter in Tulsa. And so I started serving there, and I served there all the time, and I just couldn't stop. It was just so life-giving. Every time I was off work, I was on my way to Tulsa, and I was serving in this shelter. And before I knew it, this little boy showed up to the shelter. He's 11 years old, and his name was Quan. And God started really pulling on my heart that I needed to maybe start fostering him. And I was like, are you kidding me? I am 20. I had just turned 24. I am not married. If I was going to foster as a single person, I would probably imagine getting a kindergarten girl, some really cute little girl that I could take with me to all the children's ministry stuff, since that was my job. I mean, this only made sense, right? But God just kept intersecting our lives over and over and over again. This little boy, he had 2 brothers, and they got to go to a foster home really quickly, but Quan just wasn't getting placed and wasn't getting placed and wasn't getting placed. And I finally started asking, why? How come this little boy I'm hanging out with all the time isn't going anywhere? They said, well, these are the issues he has. And so actually his label that we have on his file is hard to place. Hard to place. I said, what does that mean? They said, well, what that means is with his issues and with his age and the fact that he's a boy and all these things, it's going to be more difficult for us to find a placement. In fact, if his parents' rights are terminated at some point, that hard to place label will be changed with a label and put with a label that said unadoptable. And I was like, that does not sit right with me. And I remember going home and just talking to the Lord about this, this is wrong, but this is also terrifying to think about, what you might be calling me to do here. And through a lot of prayer and a lot of talking to my parents and other people that I greatly admire as people that are wiser than me in the faith, I counted the cost, and I said, all right, this is what the Lord's calling me to do. And so 6.5 years ago, I found myself 24 years old, single children's minister in Owasso, Oklahoma, driving home from the shelter 2 days before Christmas with an 11-year-old boy in tow. That's what I found myself doing. No, you don't have, it's just what it was. It's just what it was. And I distinctly remember on the way home looking around thinking, okay, at the shelter we had all these planned things to do. We're about to go to my apartment, and I think I have Checkers and Space Jam. I remember thinking that. And we're going to need to make a pit stop at Walmart and get some other things to do. We played a lot of checkers his first couple weeks he was with me. But I remember driving home and just being terrified. This weird fear just kind of coming over me. And I remember starting to pray, okay, Lord, I have it written down in journals and I can go back and read it. It's kind of cool. But Lord, I am so afraid. And I trust you, and I trust that you're good, and I trust that you're working, and there's no doubt about it that you're the one weaving this together, but I am afraid, so help me to trust you. And I remember feeling him tell me, yeah, this is not your story, this is mine. This is not your plan, this is mine. It's God's story, not mine. I'm not the boss. And there was no doubt that he's the one that led me to the shelter. There's no doubt that he intertwined my life with Kwan's and that he wanted this child to come home with me, even if it was just for a short time. So I joined into what God was doing, and I linked my story to his. God has always had a plan, by the way. You know that, right? He's always had a plan. We find ourselves this week in the middle of a time period where God's people have been split into two kingdoms. And we have all these evil kings in the northern kingdom. And so God sends his prophets, right? This is how we're introduced to Elijah. He sends his prophets to his people, calling them to be faithful to the one true God instead of bowing down to worship other gods, specifically Baal. And Elijah comes, and he is faithful to God. Though not perfectly, he is faithful to God, and God uses him to speak to his people and to work towards accomplishing his plan. We find ourselves, you talked about this a couple days ago, or maybe even last night, with this huge swath of Baal prophets of Baal just slaughtered after this miracle happens, after God displays his power on Mount Carmel. And because all those people are slaughtered, Queen Jezebel, evil Queen Jezebel, the wife of King Ahab, she says, I want Elijah's head on a platter. I'm going to do to you what you've done to all these prophets of Baal. You better look out. I'm coming for you. I've got your name, Elijah. So what does Elijah do? He runs like a scared little kid with his tail between his legs, and he runs into this cave on Mount Horeb. And God shows up there, and he speaks. He speaks. And I find it really interesting that when God speaks, Elijah has the response that he has. Listen to what he says. In 1 Kings 19, the Lord had just said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah says this, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, am the only one left, and they seek my life to take it away. He basically says, Lord, I'm all that's left. There's no other followers of you here. They're trying to kill me, so of course I'm going to hide. What do you expect? And then I kind of think this is interesting too. The Lord's response to Elijah is not what you may think. He doesn't seem to comfort him here. He doesn't even seem to confront him here. He just gives him the next steps. He just shows him a little bit of his plan. This is what he says. The Lord said to him, go. Isn't that funny? Elijah melting down, and the Lord says, go. Return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. The Lord has a plan. Remember, it's his story. And actually, based off verse 18, that last verse that we just read, he even reminds Elijah that he is actually not the only follower of Yahweh left. Elijah complains, and the Lord gives Elijah instructions to forward his story. The Lord has spoken in this text. Elijah obeys. He obeys. And he is used by God in doing so. He leaves and he finds Elisha. Listen to the text. Verse 19. So he departed. If you actually have a hard copy Bible and you have a pen, I want you to circle that phrase, so he departed, and then go back previously to verse 15 where the Lord said go, and circle that phrase. And then maybe connect them with a line or something. The Lord said go, so he departed. Obedience, right? So he departed from there, and he found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Okay, so what's happening here? That's weird. Well, we all know there's no tractors in this time, and so how they would plow fields is they would hook these oxen together. They'd call it yoking them together, okay, the two. And those oxen would pull this kind of machine type thing, and the person behind them would either stand on it while they would lead and plow, or he would walk behind them while they would plow the field. And so he has 12 yoke, which is 24 oxen, which, like the little buffer said, means that he's probably quite wealthy. Okay? But the point here is that he goes and he finds Elisha. He does what the Lord has called him to do. And then here's what it says he does. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. Now, if someone came by us and threw their cloak on us, it would freak us out. We'd probably run the other direction. I would think, that is someone I never want to talk to again. That's probably what I would honestly think, okay? That's what I would think. But here, like what this is emphasizing and what this actually means, like what this says in our terms, is basically Elijah enlists Elisha as his successor. He is saying, by putting his cloak on Elisha, that you know how God has worked through me and spoken through me and done these powerful things through me? That power is now going to be passed on to you when my time is through. You are now my successor. And Elisha has a response. Elisha's response is really fun to read. In 1 Kings 19, read verses 20 and 21 with me. It says, and he left. Circle that again. He was called and he went. He left. He left the oxen and he ran after Elijah. And he said, let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you. And he said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? And he returned from following him and took the yoke of the oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. You can circle that last phrase. And he went after Elijah and he assisted him. Go. The Lord says go, and he goes. Elisha is called and he goes. A lot of people kind of like to try to make a big deal about the fact that Elisha went back and kissed his family goodbye. But actually, if you're studying it, from everything I can tell, it's actually juxtaposing the idea that the prophets of Baal had been kissing the feet of Baal. They had been worshiping him and said, kissed the feet of Baal earlier in the passage. It's showing their allegiance to Baal. And then here, the opposite is taking place. Elisha is kissing his parents goodbye, showing his allegiance to the Lord. And he goes. He goes. And that's our text for the night. That's the whole thing. The names of the two prophets in this passage, Elijah and Elisha, they indicate the way that God's story is going to continue to unfold. Elijah obeyed the Lord, but not perfectly. Not perfectly. Specifically, I pointed out that he obeyed by going, but all those instructions the Lord had given him, we have no indication in the text that Elijah actually anoints Elisha. We know that he enlists him, but we don't know that he anoints him. We don't read about Elijah meeting or even attempting to meet Hazael. And we know for sure that Elisha is actually the one that arranges for Jehu to be anointed. So Elijah does obey. He gets out of the cave and he goes. But he doesn't obey perfectly. And here is why I'm careful to explain that to you. Because, and I know what the buffer meant when it said that he's the hero. It meant that God's working through him. But I just want to make sure you understand that Elijah is not the hero of this story. And Elisha is not the hero of this story. God is always the hero. No one will thwart his plans. No one will end his story. So here's what I'm saying, because I know that to be true about the Lord. Elijah chose to obey, and God said go, and Elijah stepped out of the cave, and he went. Here's what you can do. You can come alongside what the Lord is doing, or you can step aside, and the Lord will continue to forward his plan without you. You can join him, or you can get out of his way. That's what you can do. His story actually does not hinge upon you. It doesn't. And of course, think about that. That actually makes sense. We are imperfect. He is perfect. We are sinful. He is holy and righteous. We are selfish. He is perfect. We are struggling. We are completely lost in and of ourselves. And yet, what God does is this. He reaches down to us and he invites us into what he is doing. God has historically created people, called people, and used people to accomplish his purposes and further his kingdom. That is awesome news for us. He calls Moses, the stutterer, to lead an entire nation of people. He calls Elijah, hiding in a cave, to go to Elisha and continue the story. He calls Paul, a murderer of Christians, to become a church planter. He called Peter, who's a loudmouth, to be the leader of his church. He calls Timothy, the youngin, to set an example for older believers. He called my cousins, Jay and Caitlin Greer, the Americans, to go across the world to Japan to plant churches and share Jesus with unreached people groups. He called Eric, an MD, to make videos to gather more support for foster families. He calls my friend Ashley to care deeply for her 12th grade small group girls. He calls my friend Micah, who is just 15 years old, to reach out to her friend that she sees as fading off the map, is drifting further and further away as high school starts to consume her life. He has called my mom to go to the place where she works, a women's clinic of all places, and to see the employees that God has put around her and to reach out to them and pray for them by name and bring him up in as many conversations as possible. He has called a lot of your youth leaders and Eric and the entire crew to lead a week of CIY so students like you can be challenged and encouraged and renewed. He called a single woman in Oklahoma to take home an 11-year-old boy from a shelter. He's always had a plan. When Quan first came home with me at 11, I wrote this little rhyming children's story for him to help him understand his emotions and how he seems to process things. The counselor said he just jumps to anger, and we need to be able to help him understand what leads up to that. So I wrote him this poem, and I would read it to him every night. And it was twofold. It's kind of like a little children's book. And it's twofold. The first part explains his emotions, and then the second part is like a prayer that I have for him about how I can see God using him in the future. And I wrote this when he was like 11 and a half. And I brought it, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to read it to you. I'd like to share it with you. Is that okay? Okay. So, it's called The Boy with the Big Heart. And here's what it says. The boy with the big heart, he came in my life. He wriggled himself right in. And what happened to my heart, you wouldn't believe it. It grew in its size by 10. His heart was so big that when he felt happy, he smiled with every part. His eyes would sparkle, his legs would get jumpy. He just smiled right down to his heart. He can't hold in excitement. He squeals and he laughs and he yells. He hugs and gets goofy in a little sort of way. And to every person he tells why he is so excited and happy and ready, he says the whole bit with a grin. Until you get all swept away in excitement, his happy just sucks you right in. His heart was so big that when he felt angry, he felt it right down to his bone. His eyes quickly narrowed, his voice, how it carried. The hurt he is feeling is shown. And after his anger, his heart was so big that he desperately wanted to mend. His eyes filled with tears, his heart filled with worry, until once again we were friends. His heart was so big that when he felt sad, tear-filled eyes were the norm. He would try not to cry, may not even speak. but the tears were always evidence of a storm that was brewing inside his thoughts, in his mind, in his soul, in his heart. He would cry for others and cry for himself. He would cry and cry out for a fresh start. And then he would sleep. When finally the tears would stop streaming, he would close his eyes and steady his breathing. He would escape reality and instead just try dreaming. And when he would wake, quiet, thoughtful, accepting, he would decide, enough being sad, now it's time for correcting. For making things better, for making things new. It's time for his fresh start. This is what the boy would decide to do, the boy with the big giant heart. He would look up. He would open eyes wide. He would lean into God and what God would provide. He would keep on moving and growing and loving. That's what the boy would decide. And you know what I saw from this big-hearted boy? Something I knew would be done. I saw God use him to change the world, grabbing other hearts one by one. He's changed coaches and parents and friends and teachers. He's changed counselors and principals and small groups and preachers. He's changed me. Actually, God has changed me through him. And I am so thankful. I could never express all my thanks to him. So arms open wide for the big-hearted boy is how I try to remain. In happy times and sad, through good times and bad, the big-hearted boy is who I claim. He has stolen my heart. He is my big-hearted boy. He has burrowed himself right in. And do you know what has happened to my heart? It has grown in its size by 10. That's it. That was it. And I would read this to him and I would pray this over him because this is what I want him to lean into so desperately. And God has given me an opportunity to share his good news with this little boy that he's entrusted to my care. And hear me, God reaches down to us and invites us into what he is doing. He has historically created people, called people, and used people to accomplish his purposes and further his kingdom. Gosh, I hope that you respond to his call tonight. In Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38, we see the disciples following Jesus. And Jesus sees this group of people, and it says that he has compassion on them, and his heart breaks for them because they are harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. You know what sheep without a shepherd equals? Dead sheep. That's what that equals. They wander, they get lost, they're really dumb animals. And things come and they kill them, it's really bad. And that's how the Lord sees all these lost people. He has compassion on them because they're harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And so he turns to his disciples and he says, hey guys, see all those people? Do you see them? The harvest of all those lost people, it's plentiful. But the workers, the kingdom workers, they are few. So pray and ask the Lord of the harvest to send workers into this field. And then Jesus says to the same disciples, just a little while later, after he has died and risen, before he ascends, he says, hey, and as you are going about your life, don't forget, make disciples. Baptize people in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach them to obey and to trust and to lean in everything I have commanded you. And surely I'll be with you. I'll be with you till the very end. And we see in other places that he says that we are to pray for those who persecute us. We are to love our enemies. We see that we are supposed to care for the orphan and the widow and the oppressed. We see that throughout Scripture. God reaches down to us and he invites us into what he is doing. He has historically created people, called people, and used people to accomplish his purposes and further his kingdom. I hope you respond to joining into his story. Here's the deal, guys. It's not easy. There may be easy parts, but altogether, if you really want to stick it out, it's not easy. Worth it? Yes, absolutely, hands down, without a doubt. Easy? Nah, not a chance. But remember, you are joining his story, not the other way around. You are not the boss. You're not the boss. In fact, he called Moses, this stutterer, to lead an entire nation of people. And you know how that ended for Moses? He died without being able to go into the promised land. He calls Elijah, who's hiding in this cave, who had done these miraculous things. He calls him to pass on the baton to Elisha. He called Paul, the murderer of Christians, to become a church planner. And then guess how that went for Paul? He was beheaded. He was beheaded. He called Peter to lead his church, and Peter was actually crucified upside down. He called my cousins, Jay and Caitlin, the Americans, to this unreached people group. And you know what that meant? That meant they had to leave everything they knew here. I mean, everything they knew except God. They left their family and their friends and their language. And they moved to a new place. And God, in his kindness, have given them a new family, the church that he is growing in Japan. He called Ashley to care for her high school small group. And it has cost her late night phone calls and early morning coffees as she pours wisdom into these girls as they confess sins and struggles to her, and she holds them accountable and helps them know the truth and stick with Jesus. He called my friend Micah to reach out to her friend, and she's terrified to do this. And we've been talking about it this summer, and she's still going to do it, and she's still going to do it, and her friend's going with her on a trip next week. And she's afraid she's going to lose her friend by asking her to stick with Jesus. He called Eric and your leaders and Drew and everybody that's been here to lead a week of CIY for you guys, so that you can be encouraged and strengthened and renewed. And it has cost time and money and sleep and certain foods and being away from family, so that way that can happen. He called a single woman in Oklahoma to take an 11-year-old boy home from the shelter. And you know what's going on now, 6.5 years later? We've had a lot of ups and downs, lots. A lot of battles in the school system to get him caught up to where he needs to be. And then he's fallen back behind since then. And if any of you were here last year, you'd know that he had run away. We were having some issues, and he had run away to find his biological mom and had gotten into some trouble. And so it's been 2 years of battling this trouble. He was actually able to come home. He was found, and he had to do like this kind of program. Then he got to come home, and he was actually adopted after 6 years of waiting and waiting and waiting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And he was adopted in September of this last year, and that was probably a high moment for me of this last year. It was awesome. It was awesome. Yeah. It really was like, it was a beautiful picture of what God has done for us through Jesus. It was cool. It was very cool. And then 9 months later, after that adoption, he actually has found himself in some serious trouble again. Same trouble, same issues, same running, same fear, same hold on his life. These 6.5 years, but especially these last 2, they've been really hard. Really hard. In our home, for our church, for our family, for him. And sometimes I can find myself in this cave of like hopelessness. Hopelessness. It has been challenging to remember when God called me to this and why he called me to this. But I am reminded in nights like tonight that it is not my story. It's not my story, and it's not America's story of the blind side, and it's not even Kwan's story. It is God's story. And so I have hope. And I get to step out of that cave and I get to reach out to the one that God has entrusted to me to care for, my son, Quan. And the same woman that God called to bring the child home, God now calls to take phone calls from my son at 18 when he finds himself in trouble. And as hard as it is, God has been kind and good to me, to give me opportunity after opportunity to reach Quan for Jesus. The newest opportunity is through extremely expensive 15-minute phone calls. And while my prayers and my plans for Quan have not yet been answered how I thought, I have seen God change others and reach others through this story. I've seen that. You know why? Because the story is linked to God. Because it is linked to the Lord. And while my prayer for Quan has not yet been answered how I thought, I find great hope knowing that God's story is always to be continued. And hear me tonight. He is calling you to reach others for His glory and their benefit. And He does not promise you at all in this book that it will be easy. He does not promise you that it won't cost you or that it will be like an American dream come true. He does not even promise that you will get to see how it ends. But you know what He promises? He promises that He is with you. He promises that He will sustain you. He promises that He is here in this place with you. He promises that the most privileged and alive and satisfying and purposeful life you can live is one that is faithful to Jesus and His mission. And His promises, they ring true, friends. You will find your purpose when you reach others for the glory of God. I promise you. So, the question really is, will you allow Him to work through you? Not the real question. Will you truly attach your story to His and go where He calls you? A lot of you need to wrestle with that this week. You wrote down a name. Are you going to follow through with that when you go home? Are you going to follow through? Even if it doesn't go as planned. And a lot of you are going, yeah, actually I am. No doubt in my mind. I'm going to follow through. I know it. I'm going to reach others. So my question to you would be who? Who specifically? I want a name. You're supposed to write down a name.